Are you tired of killing your allies for profit? Do you like making obscure cards work? Have you ever wanted to play GELDUS, the little Guy of Dorumegia? Then Gentle Merlin may be the deck for you. Welcome to the deck profile and matchup guide for my 5th place Texas Regional deck. For those unfamiliar, Merlin is a mage warrior hybrid, or in other words, a Gish. Her game plan revolves around accruing levels, card advantage, and powerful allies until she inevitably blows up her opponents with powerful spells and attacks. Her level 2, Merlin Memory Thief, lets her banish floating memory cards to gain levels. This combos well with her level 3, Merlin Kingslayer, who passively gains level counters on her recollection phase. Though that's not all. Anytime her counters become even, she draws a card and gets an attack buff until end of turn. So if you can banish a floating memory card as level 2 Merlin, you'll get the even counter buff on your first Kingslayer turn. All of this means that Merlin-based decks are heavily rewarded for efficiently getting floating memory into their graveyard. So let's go over our sources of floating memory first. Most Merlin decks run Cremation Ritual to gain card advantage and put floating memory into the yard while ascending to level 3. Cremation Ritual lets you sacrifice an ally to draw 2 cards, and when combined with a floating memory ally or library witch, this combo gives you a +1 card advantage. Gentle Merlin, however, does not use Cremation Ritual. Gentle Merlin does not sacrifice her allies for profit. Instead, Gentle Merlin uses the card Gentle Respite. Gentle Respite lets you draw a card into your memory if your influence is less than your opponent. Since Gentle Respite also has classless floating memory, this lets you go +1 on resources if you get the draw. To make the card draw on Gentle Respite more consistent, we play Fragmented Spirit. With the Fragmented Spirit, you draw 1 less card on turn 1, which makes the card draw effect from Gentle Respite much more consistent. Being on only 6 cards means you can go down to 5 influence or less when Gentle Respite is activated, and most opponents won't want to go that low. However, Gentle Respite has a few weaknesses. It can only be cast at slow speed, making it very vulnerable to graveyard hate like Scavenging Raccoons or Sea Sprite Diver. Another weakness is that you can only +1 with it in the first few turns, as later in the game, your influence will be much bigger than your opponents in general. The fire staple Creative Shock helps with this. Creative Shock lets you draw 2 cards and then discard 1 card at fast speed. If you manage to discard something with floating memory, you gain a +1 resource advantage. However, on its own, it's not very consistent, as it's only 4 cards in the deck. To up the consistency on this, we also run Retold Fortune. Retold Fortune is a fast floating memory card that lets you discard a card and then draw a card, but with the stipulation that you must discard a spell card. Gentle Respite being a spell card with floating memory makes it a perfect target, and is another way to go +1 on resources at fast speed. To give Retold Fortune another target, Gentle Merlin runs Fast Cure. Like Gentle Respite, Fast Cure is a spell card with classless floating memory, meaning you can +1 with both Creative Shock and Retold Fortune. Though, unlike Gentle Respite, Fast Cure can be cast at fast speed on its own, and Fast Cure's effect is a champion heal instead of a card draw. The healing effect is conditioned on you having less influence than your opponent, so Fragmented Spirit synergizes here too. The next card is Savage Slash, a 2-cost attack for 2 damage with Warrior Floating Memory. Importantly, the 2 damage on this card can be combined with Lorraine's Sword of Seeking to hit the critical 3 damage threshold for removing staple allies, so this card also doubles as removal. Stalwart Shieldmate is the last floating memory card, and one of the few allies in this deck. She serves an important role versus attack-based and ally-based decks since her taunt ability makes enemy attacks prioritize her as the target. Since we're never cremating her, it's easy to get value out of her taunt. Outside of the floating memory cards, we have our utility and damage cards. There are 4 Resolute stands in the main board to protect Merlin, Shieldmate, and other allies from enemy attacks. When comboed with Stalwart Shieldmate, this card does a ton of work versus ally and attack-based decks. More on that later when we go over matchups. The last bit of spice before we get into the more standard Merlin stuff is Prismatic Edge and Spirit Blade Ascension, but without running any off elements. Prismatic Edge can serve as damage, card draw, and memory destruction depending on if fire, water, or wind cards can be found in at least one player's memory. Spirit Blade Ascension basically lets you swap out one of your fielded swords for any other sword in your material deck or banishment at fast speed and without having to pay its memory cost. As a result, most Merlins running Ascension plus Prismatic Edge also run at least 1 or 2 wind and water cards so that they can get all 3 effects without needing anything from their opponent's memory. However, I do not, at least not anymore. I'm just banking on the fire from my own memory, and anything else I consider extra. The fast speed 3 damage from fire is great for taking out allies, and when comboed with Sudden Steel, you have a cheap way to deal 13 damage out of nowhere. Plus, Ascension also helps to loop Drawn Blade, so you can dig even further into your deck and make more use of excess floating memory. The rest of the deck is pretty standard Merlin stuff. Sparklight is fast and unpreventable damage to finish off allies or champions. Scry the Skies is used to dig for key cards after ascending to Kingslayer. Hasty Messenger, which lets you discard and then draw a card, is used to help with ally removal and value generation until your opponent kills it. Fireball, which lets you deal damage based off of your level at fast speed, is a big finisher or critical ally removal. Dungeon Guides are used to level up faster. Ghost of Pendragon is a strong ally that generates card advantage. Incarnate Majesty lets you summon the Majestic Spirit, which can greatly stabilize your position, as it has Intercept, gives Merlin Spell Shroud, making her an invalid target for spells, and gives all Crux units a hefty amount of damage prevention. And finally, Cruxite lets Merlin resurrect Crux cards from her graveyard and dig deeper into the deck. That covers all the cards for the general game plan. The rest of the stuff I'll get to in the next section, where I start discussing matchups. Nico's main win conditions are hitting you until you die and making you discard your entire deck, since like most card games, you lose if you go to draw a card when your deck is empty. Since her strongest discard effect is triggered by an on-champion hit effect, both win conditions can be stopped by not getting hit when she goes for the critical swing. Fortunately, her big finisher, Ravishing Finale, has a steep cost, as it requires banishing 2 floating memory from her graveyard in order to be cast. Additionally, the on-champion hit discard effect is Nico bonus, so it can't happen until she's level 2. To avoid getting hit, your best tools are the Majestic Spirit and Stalwart Shieldmate, as they have Intercept and Taunt to redirect attacks. Though, do make sure that you can keep at least 2 redirectors on the field once she can threaten the Ravishing Finale. Nico's run Smoke Bombs, which can be used to grant stealth to any ally, even your own, and importantly, stealth makes Intercept and Taunt useless, as any unit with stealth is an invalid target for attacks without True Sight, and Nico has no way to gain True Sight. So if she brings out the Smoke Bombs and you only have 1 redirector on the field, you are probably getting smacked in the face so hard you lose your entire deck. Fortunately, Resolute Stand serves double duty versus her game plan, as it can both save your Stalwart Shieldmate's life, and if you cast it using alternate cost, you can sometimes delay death for an extra turn after your deck gets emptied out. The alternate cost of Resolute Stand makes you skip your next draw phase instead of paying its reserve cost. While this can come in clutch, its downfall for Merlin is that on an even level counter turn, you'll still be forced to draw a card on your recollection phase and you'll lose anyways. In the sideboard, there's some great cards to face Nico with. As mentioned before, Nico has no way of gaining True Sight, so Under Fire is a great way to protect yourself from getting your deck emptied. Under Fire lets your champion gain stealth at fast speed for the low cost of 3 reserve and 4 life. Reprogram and Incinerate can also be useful, but depend a bit more on which specific list your opponent is running. Reprogram is great versus Vaporjet Shieldbearer, and Regalia removal can be good for Magebane Lash and other Regalia. Nullifying Lantern could maybe also be useful here too, but I feel like the matchup isn't that bad without it. I'll go over Nullifying Lantern later when I talk about the Fire aggro decks. Win Tristan is actually one of my favorite decks to play against right now, not because I think it's Merlin favored, but because, despite what everyone likes to say, she actually has some exploitable weaknesses, and I've got some spicy tech to exploit those weaknesses. Win Tristans are usually playing to one of 3 win conditions: Shadow Strike, Slice and Dice, and plain all allies. Slice and Dice and allies are both much less effective in the face of Resolute Stand and Interceptors, so I'll really just be talking about the Shadow Strike strategy. Shadow Strike is a card that can deal damage equal to 4 plus the amount of preparation counters on Tristan that ignores Taunt and Intercept. This makes Shadow Strike really hard to stop, since Taunt and Intercept are often staple tools versus attack-based decks, and her prep counters can't be directly interacted with. Her level 3, Tristan Shadow Reaver, lets her spend 2 preparation counters to redirect an attack, targeting her onto one of her shadows. So if you can swing in some big hits, she'll often be forced to redirect an attack to avoid a big chunk of damage. That all said, the Shadow Strike strategy isn't without its weaknesses. For starters, Shadow Strike is a slow strategy. Tristans usually have to take an extra materialization between level 0 and level 2 to ensure they have both a healthy amount of cards in hand and a good amount of prep counters before hitting level 3. Additionally, her level 2 only has 22 health, so if you high roll a little bit, you can sometimes kill her before she hits level 3 with some help from Sudden Steel and Spirit Blade Ascension. So against Shadow Strike, you're in a race to put enough pressure on Tristan to either kill her or make her use enough prep counters defensively that her game plan stalls out and she dies. And in both cases, this is where we get to bring out my favorite little guy, GELDUS. GELDUS is a beefy ally with 5 power and 8 life, so unless Tristan has a lot of life to spare, she may be forced to spend prep counters to redirect attacks to her shadows. This is especially relevant if she hasn't had the chance to mastermind scheme yet. If she's desperate enough, she may also innervate to de-level to gain stealth. Losing a level to gain stealth like that is a huge cost, since she'll have to re-level, and it usually leaves her without any defenses versus Merlin's spells. Another great thing about GELDUS is that killing GELDUS generally takes too many resources for Tristan to do without disrupting her game plan greatly. What's she gonna do? Shadow Strike it? Slice and dice it? Even having her and her shadows attack it with Shadow's Claw would only be about 5 damage, and if she does that, she's also not generating prep counters from Windwalker boots. Dream Fairy is a low cost option, but since it just puts GELDUS into memory, it's a very temporary solution, since Dream Fairies are easy for Merlin to kill. Between the Sword of Seeking, Prismatic Edge plus Ascension, Sparklight, and Creative Shock, Merlin has a lot of options for killing Dream Fairy. GELDUS' tech I developed specifically for the Tristan matchup, and I'm really happy it's worked out. As best I can tell, I'm the original GELDUS user as Glass, who took GELDUS to top cut of the Yeti July online regional, got the tech from me after I whipped it out versus him, and before that regional, I haven't seen it anywhere on Luxera's map. Under Fire can also be a good tool in this matchup. Like Nico, Tristan has no way to gain True Sight, so it can be used to just stop an attack at fast speed. The downside in this matchup, however, is that it's easy pickings for Incapacitate. Incapacitate just negates an action card, and Under Fire's an action. Not much you can do about that. Incarnate Majesty is a card that I have mixed feelings about in this matchup. Unlike GELDUS, Incarnate Majesty is pretty heavily countered by both Dream Fairy and Incapacitate, so it's my main go-to card for removal when I'm sideboarding versus Tristan. Fire Aggro Zander, or FiZa, is a hyper aggro deck whose main win condition is hitting you really hard and really fast and killing you before they run out of steam. Their main strength is that they have one of the most explosive turn 3s of the game. Their main weakness is that they lose a lot of steam after their explosive turn. So the main counterplay is to keep their board as clear as possible and otherwise prevent as much damage as you can on their Poison Dagger turn. If you can do that and stabilize, you've probably got the game in the bag, though that's easier said than done. The card that really makes Aggro Zander hit hard and fast is Poison Dagger. It hits the target for 1 damage, and then until end of turn, anytime that target takes damage, they take 1 extra. This may not sound a lot, but FiZa is optimized to use this card, and if you can't get your defenses up, Poison Dagger can account for upwards of 7 damage by itself on the turn that they use it. In game 1, before you can sideboard, my plan is usually one of 2 things. Power level to 2 and hold up a Resolute Stand, or materialize Terrafring or Safeguard Amulet after going to level 1, and then also holding up a Resolute Stand if possible. After that, I try to get the Majestic Spirit out if I can, but I find it's usually easier to just kill Zander since I've often had to go down a lot of cards from playing defensive cards and allies, and plus, he doesn't have much in the way of defenses. In this matchup, all of Merlin's allies are actually quite useful. Even Hasty Messenger and Dungeon Guide can provide a substantial amount of removal since many of his allies only have 1 or 2 health. Shieldmates are also great damage prevention, but be careful about Korhazi Arsonists. Korhazi Arsonist's ability makes allies they hit go straight to banishment instead of the graveyard, so if you are counting on the floating memory from Shieldmate, you may be out of luck. Nullifying Lantern can make or break this matchup. Nullifying Lantern is a card that turns all cards in all graveyards into exclusively Norm Element cards. This is important because Fire Zander has multiple cards that require banishing fire cards from the graveyard to work. Rending Flames is the main card to watch out for, as it's an easy way for FiZa to finish you off after their Poison Dagger turn. Past game 1, you can side in Quicksilver Grail. Quicksilver Grail offers 2 big advantages over Grand Crusader Ring. The first is that it can protect a Nullifying Lantern from getting removed before they go to use Rending Flames. The second is that you can use it to hide what you've materialized. Hidden information may not sound that valuable, but since FiZa is mixed damage, Safeguard Amulet is another great target for Grail, so you can force them to guess what they should commit to and then trip them up. Now you might be wondering, Gish, why go to the trouble of finding room for Quicksilver Grail when most people don't even run it nowadays? A big part of it was that I knew there would be at least 1 FiZa at my regional. One of my friends is a FiZa main, and while he is newer to the game, he has also been grinding hard, and I respect his Fire Zander. For the main deck, Reprogram is also a good option to sideboard in, as it can kill Sable Remnants and prevent the on-hit effects of some of Zander's allies. Importantly, the Poison Dagger bonus damage only gets added if damage would be dealt, so if you reprogram an ally swinging in for 1, you're actually preventing 2 damage on the dagger turn. Additionally, Korhazi Courier's ability is also on hit, so if you reprogram her, you're basically preventing 4 damage with the reprogram on his dagger turn. Blanche can also help as an alternative to Safeguard Amulet, since she can also prevent non-combat damage. Her advantage over Safeguard Amulet is that she's in the main deck. Last but not least, Underfire can also be quite good because, like Nico, Zander can't get True Sight. Fire Lorraine has some similarities to Zander, but the strategy is a bit different. Fire Lorraine gains a lot more power from having fire cards in the graveyard than Zander does, which is both her strength and her weakness. Her main advantage over Zander is that she can wield Fiery Momentum. Fire Momentum gets bonus damage based on the number of fire cards in her graveyard. This means that unlike Zander, she doesn't have to expend cards from her graveyard to get value from them. Nullifying Lantern as your first materialization can be very high value, as it turns off the main abilities of both Fire Momentum and Rending Flames. The usual tools to stop or mitigate attacks like Shieldmate and Resolute Stands are also very valuable in this matchup. However, do be careful with your Shieldmates and other allies. Unlike FiZa, Lorraine has a devastating cleave attack. Flame Sweep is a 1-2 damage attack that hits all of your units, so both your champion and allies. This combos very well with Lorraine's level 2 ability, that gives her attacks +2 power, and on kill draw a card. So if you have multiple allies on the field, she'll clear them, damage you, and draw multiple cards all in a single play. Another important thing to note about Cleave is that it doesn't target anything. This means that abilities like Taunt, Intercept, and Stealth are all irrelevant. Despite Cleave ignoring Intercept, the Majestic Spirit is still crazy high value into this matchup. So if you can't kill her fast enough, it's still worth bringing out. Just remember that she still has options for damaging you through its Intercept and Spell Shroud, like Blazing Throw. Blazing Throw is a skill that lets her deal 4 damage at slow speed. Like Cleave, it can also hit you for some damage through Majestic Spirit. Spell Shroud only prevents spells from targeting you, not skills, and Blazing Throw is a skill. The Quicksilver Grail plus Nullifying Lantern combo is even better in this matchup than FiZa, since she gains way more power from her graveyard. I was expecting a good amount of Fire Lorraine at Regionals too, which was another deck that I wanted Nullifying Lantern plus Quicksilver Grail for. The rest of the sideboard cards though aren't very valuable. Unlike FiZa, she can gain True Sight, so Underfire is only useful versus her if she gets greedy and doesn't use the Sword of Seeking. This means the main thing to bring in for game 2 is Quicksilver Grail. Blanche, Underfire, and Disintegrate may be able to provide some value, but only in situations that are either rare or that Lorraine can easily avoid. Erupting Rhapsody is a deck whose main win condition revolves around the cards Erupting Rhapsody and Fiery Momentum. Erupting Rhapsody lets the user banish any amount of fire cards from their graveyard, gain levels equal to the number of fire cards banished, and then deal skill damage equal to their level. The deck's power comes almost entirely from their graveyard, so like Fire Lorraine, this deck is very vulnerable to Nullifying Lantern. The basic plan versus this deck is to get out Nullifying Lantern and then kill them before they can kill you. This can be hard though, because they bring Regalia Hate to remove Nullifying Lanterns and can also kill you pretty fast if you let them. The Erupting matchup isn't something I have actually played into this season. Despite that, it's the actual main reason I found room for Quicksilver Grail in my sideboard. I know that one of my locals likes Erupting, so I thought they might bring it for regionals after Matt G took 2nd place with Erupting at Chicago. Outside of that, Thick Opie took Erupting to Chicago and I knew he'd be at the regional too, so I was worried he might bring it here. Part of what makes Erupting so scary is that at least in a Merlin, I feel like without Nullifying Lantern, the matchup is basically an auto loss. With Nullifying Lantern, it's usually still Erupting favored, but with Nullifying Lantern plus Quicksilver Grail to protect it, I feel like this matchup generally becomes Merlin favored. So Nullifying plus Grail is here because I didn't want to basically accept automatically losing any of my games. Outside of Nullifying Lantern plus Grail, your main outs are Blanche and the Majestic Spirit. Though keep in mind that like Blazing Throw, Erupting Rhapsody is skill damage, so Merlin can still be targeted when the Spirit is out. Also be mindful of when you pop the Quicksilver Grail. You may actually want to tank a hit or two from Fire Momentum to keep the Lantern safe. The Erupting player could be trying to bait it out so that they can then destroy the Lantern in the same turn, and then have Erupting ready to go in their next turn. Wind Robots, or Wind Erupting, is the matchup I tested versus the most for much earlier versions of this deck. Their main win condition is to buff up an Automaton ally's attack, and then attack with it multiple times unhindered. Their main weakness is that this big combo is very telegraphed, and that the buffs have to be put on an ally, and allies are easy to kill. Fireball and sometimes Sparklight or Prismatic Edge can be used to kill the buffed up ally before damage is resolved. Resolute Stand is also pretty high value since they tend to swing a lot of times. From the sideboard, Reprogram is extremely high value since it puts 2 debuff counters on an Automaton ally, in addition to giving floating memory. This not only significantly lowers their damage output, but it can also be used to kill low health automatons like Shimmercloak Assassin, which is otherwise difficult to kill. It can also be used to kill Andronica before her on-enter effect resolves. This matchup is the main reason I put Reprogram in the sideboard. Under Fire can also do a lot of work in this matchup, but only if they don't play around it. The Wind Erupting player has the option to bring out Rose, and Rose has True Sight, so if they choose her as the buff target, Under Fire is useless versus this combo. Water decks tend to be mostly focused on allies and attacks, though they do have the option of dealing reliable non-combat damage from Scepter of Lumina. Scepter of Lumina will deal 4 damage to you anytime they level up, which can account to somewhere between 4 and 20 damage, depending on which variant of the deck you're facing. Their main strength is that they have a lot of options for protecting their allies and disrupting your game plan. Their main weakness is that they tend to be on the slow side. One of the main tricks they have for disrupting your game plan is Sea Sprite Diver. Sea Sprite Diver is an automaton ally with respectable stats that can deny you floating memory by banishing it from your graveyard. If you know your opponent is playing Diver, make sure to throw your floating memory into your graveyard on their end phase. One of the upsides of this matchup is that if you can get out the Majestic Spirit, you'll probably just win. Water tends not to have the damage to actually kill it, and they don't have non-damage ways to remove it like Zephyr or Disintegrate. They do, however, have tools to keep it from coming out in the first place. Frostbind and Cerulean Decree basically read pay an extra 2 or lose the card. So if you can afford to wait until you have at least 2 extra cards when casting Incarnate Majesty, make sure you do so. Another card to watch out for is Fracturize. Fracturize will basically disable your swords, making them invalid targets for both Ghosts of Pendragon and Spiritblade Ascension. The main counterplay here is to hold up an Ascension to protect the sword if they go to Fracturize it. One cool play is to use a Ghost of Pendragon while holding up an Ascension. Then, if they try to Fracturize a sword to deny the Pendragon's on enter from resolving, you can ascend the sword to make the Fracturize fizzle and still use Pendragon's ability to draw cards. I faced off against 2 Water Ally decks at Regionals, and I think I did that play versus both players. The Merlin Mirror is actually a matchup I don't have that much experience with. I didn't start playing Grand Archive until the beginning of Alchemical Revolution, so at my local scene, I was usually the only person on Merlin. My main advice is that using Dungeon Guide to go to level 2 can be a big power play if you can start eating their floating memory. Though they can also do the same to you, so be careful of that. Outside of that, this is another matchup where I think GELDUS feels pretty good. He can often come out on your first turn as Kingslayer, and you may force the opposing Merlin to disintegrate or fireball it, making it easier to keep your own Majestic Spirit out later. Blanche and Disintegrate are essentials in this matchup. Blanche protects yourself and your allies from their burn, and Disintegrate helps deal with opposing Majestic Spirits or GELDUS. Fire Rai terrifies me, and it may be scary, but I'm going to show you some real Rai gameplay just so you know what it's like. I really only feel safe versus Rai if he's already dead, or I have the Majestic Spirit out with Blanche ready to go from my hand. This is because his main strength is that he can take you from 0 damage to dead in a single turn, and if you let him do what he wants, he'll outdraw you like crazy. Plus, if you're not prepared for it, he can turn your big hits into 0 damage that draws him a lot of cards. Rai's main weaknesses are that all of his damage is spell damage. He usually doesn't have much ally removal before he hits level 3, he usually needs to play cards that can also draw you cards like Gloomspire Market and Increasing Danger. And lastly, he usually has very few cards in hand once he hits level 3, since he can't really use floating memory. Being pure spell damage means that the Majestic Spirit is crazy high value if you can keep it alive. You might think that it's really hard for him to remove since Arcane Blast only targets champions, but like Merlin, he can easily remove it with a Disintegrate or a Fireball. If he tries to remove it with damage though, a Blanche can literally be a lifesaver. His inability to remove most allies before level 3 means that getting out some hasty messengers early can provide crazy high value. The damage can add up, and you can sometimes go +3 in terms of value with all the floating memory you can discard. Playing Stalwart Shieldmates are, however, a liability in Gentle Merlin. Gentle Merlin doesn't run Cremation Ritual, and Rai doesn't need to kill the Shieldmate to kill you. So if you play a Shieldmate, you're just losing a card from your hand for nothing. That said, I don't actually recommend siding them out. They do still have value as something to discard with Creative Shock and Hasty Messenger. So when you side stuff out, remove the Resolute Stands instead, which are generally useless in this matchup. Aside from his cards that just kill you, the main card to watch out for is Arcane Spellshield. Arcane Spellshield prevents the next instance of damage, and gives Rai enlightenment counters equal to the amount of damage prevented. Importantly, Rai can trade in 3 enlightenment counters to draw a card at fast speed. This means that a big fireball can actually turn into 2+ cards for him, so watch out for that. The main way to play around this is to have another instance of fast speed damage to finish him off, to use a lower damage spell, like Ascension, to lessen the damage prevention and card draw, or to use Sparklight to essentially negate the card. Sparklight negates the card since Spellshield gives countered based off of damage prevented on the next damage instance, but since Sparklight's damage is unpreventable, no damage is prevented, but the Spellshield is still consumed. The important trick here is that you can let Arcane Spellshield resolve and then cast Sparklight. At the regional, I actually did finish off a Rai with perfect lethal using Sparklight to prevent an Arcane Spellshield play from getting him back into the game. Slime Silvie is a matchup that I dread. I seriously thought about skipping out on regionals just because I didn't want to play against Slime Silvie anymore. Slime Silvie embodies the phrase, "You're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't." Everything you do to interact with her outside of outright killing her provides her value in some way. Playing big hard to kill allies can grant her immortality for as long as the ally lives. Killing her allies enables Guy's Blessing and Slime King, and those both boost Storm Slime. Plus, just banishing cards from her memory directly with Prismatic Edge also powers up Storm Slime. And banishing cards from her graveyard also powers up Storm Slime. And before you say, well, if you put her down in cards, she's basically lost, I've gotten pretty tired of dying because I banished one too many cards and then end up giving perfect lethal with the Storm Slime. Silvie is a big part of why I stopped running off elements for Prismatic Edge. I just got tired of killing myself from banishing slimes with Prismatic Edge. The main counterplay that even high-level slime players can offer is usually something along the lines of, kill her faster than she kills you. But that's not very helpful because that's just Grand Archive's main win condition. And also, she's way better at fast killing than Merlin is, so that advice is especially not useful for Merlins. That all said, I do at least have a game plan versus Silvie. It feels pretty luck-based to me, and it can make games take forever, which, by the way, one of my games at regionals versus slimes was literally 40 minutes long, but it does at least work some of the time. Basically, you just try to get the Majestic Spirit out as fast as possible, and then keep it alive or keep recasting it until you can clear her board, and then get her to exhaust all of her Storm Slimes, killing the Majestic Spirit. If all that comes together, you can sometimes kill her before she kills you. This is because if you get the Majestic Spirit out, she actually can't do any damage to you without killing it first. Her allies have to hit it before Merlin because of Intercept. Additionally, the Majestic Spirit also gives Merlin Spell Shroud, so Storm Slime's on enter ability can't target Merlin since it does stuff as a spell. Also, please ignore the part where she could actually be running smoke bombs like Nico if she really wanted to. The last big tip here is that Covenant of Thorns on the Majestic Spirit isn't actually that bad. Covenant of Thorns is a regalia with ally link that reads, if damage would be dealt to your champion, that damage is dealt to linked ally instead. And importantly, ally link can target any ally, not just allies Silvie controls. I feel the need to mention this because a lot of my friends that are new to the game usually think target ally actually means target ally you control, so they don't realize Covenant can be put on an opponent's ally. At face value, Covenant of Thorns on the Majestic Spirit might seem like a game ender since you'll have to kill your own spirit before you can damage Silvie, which can take a lot of your resources and then leave you open to a counterattack. But in reality, it's Silvie that has to kill the spirit before she can damage you. All you have to do is ignore Silvie and kill her board repeatedly until you can build up a big enough board and hand to just kill her. Bring out a bunch of Pendragons and accumulate a bunch of fireballs until you can overkill her in a single turn. And I say overkill because she can heal with Gather Slimes or prevent damage with Slime Shield. Also, you don't actually have to kill your own spirit, even if you want to get rid of it on your turn. You can just use a Pendragon to return the Majestic Spirit to your material deck. Pendragon returns a Regalia to the material deck, and the Majestic Spirit is in fact a Regalia. Though, after sideboarding, you should prefer just disintegrating the Covenant instead. The main downside to actually removing the spirit is that after it's no longer on the field, Silvie can finish you off with a Storm Slime at fast speed, using either Stone Scale Band or Hymn of Gaia's Grace. That all said though, there will be many games where you just lose without any avenues for counterplay. It feels like Silvie's worst enemy is actually her own draws, and not really much that you can do as a player. It's hard to end things on a sour note, but I just really hate Slime Silvie. I think champions should be made so that you can at least do a few things to them that are unambiguously hindering their game plan, but Slime Silvie has none of that, and I hate it. To give a few examples for Merlin, banishing her floating memory before she hits level 3 can be backbreaking. Destroying her swords before she hits level 3 can also be backbreaking, And outside of Shieldmate, killing her allies is just bad for her. Even Erupting Rhapsody feels way more fun and interactive to me than playing versus Slime Silvie, largely because Nullifying Lantern is unambiguously a detriment to their game plan. When Tristan, despite seeming to be designed to counter Merlin, also feels way more fun and interactive to play into than Slimes because again, there are many things you can do that are unambiguously a detriment to our game plan. Even Diana, a champion also seemingly designed to kill Merlin, is usually more fun to play into than Silvie since she too has some very clear counterplay. That all said, thank you very much to anyone who made it this far. I really do appreciate you choosing to spend your time watching my video. If this helped you out, please take a few seconds to leave a comment. And if you don't know what to say, apple grape would be lovely. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.